Hello and welcome to this special discussion on creativity in tough times in local government. We're at the Commonwealth Local Government Forum in Cardiff and we're delighted to be joined by four representatives of various Commonwealth countries in local government. Olile George, the CEO of South African Local Government Association. Richard Kemp, who's Deputy Chair of the Local Government Association in the UK and Wales. Eugene Brown from Local Government New Zealand. And Councillor Marvin Hunt from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. Now, I suppose the first question, really, gentlemen, is everyone hears from countries that have differences in their fiscal situation right now and the political makeup. How much can we actually learn from each other, Richard?
Well, I think we can learn a lot. Four countries with different circumstances, but a lot of the solutions were the same. Clearly, the UK has the worst fiscal problems at the moment, possibly followed by South Africa. Our colleagues from Canada and New Zealand seem to have weathered the financial storm better. But wherever we are, whatever our circumstances, we need to be more efficient. We need to be more focused on the needs of the people we serve. So a lot of the solutions I've heard, not only from my three colleagues, but the rest of the conference, are applicable throughout the democratic world if we want to provide better services.
And one of the things that was talked about in the debate that we've just seen was why waste a good crisis? Now, of course, the crisis hasn't been as bad in your parts of the world. What effect does that actually have on your ability to change and move forward?
Yeah, but that's not actually true because you're only looking at the crisis today. We had, in my municipality, we had the crisis in the 1990s. So we had it 20 years ago. We've worked through that whole process so that when this crisis happened, we already had the flexibility built into our city organization so that we were able to flex to it. And so, yes, it appears as though we've done marvelously well. But it's because we went through a previous crisis that was extremely painful, and so that we actually redid and remanaged our organizations, re-engineered how we did things so that now we're able to move with the crisis as it happened.
And one of the things that we've looked at, one of the big issues that's come up actually was shared services. And we talk about innovation in local government, and shared services is one of those areas of innovation. In New Zealand, you've had a particularly interesting example. Can you tell us a bit more?
Well, we had two. One that was led by Local Government New Zealand was the formation of a funding vehicle, the Local Government Funding Agency, which was essentially a way of collectivising debt, getting the best possible credit rating, and then getting the best price to the various member councils. And that was an innovation that we led with strong central government support, and the enabling legislation for that is underway right now.
This is something that's worked in New Zealand. How much do you think this kind of model can apply in all your countries? Olile?
Well, we have different circumstances, even though we've all been affected by the crisis. I think in my own country, there's been a National Mobilizing Response Plan, referred to as a national stimulus. But what we have looked at as local government is really to creatively take advantage of what is a crisis by actually grabbing the opportunity that national government has put forward to put a massive infrastructure response program that has got spatial implications for municipalities and so on. But what we think is happening at the moment is that much as we have not yet escape the crisis implications. But I think at municipal level, there is now beginning of emergence of innovative ways to live within the limited budget resources, but at the same time looking at implementing projects that have got high impact on job creation and also using less resources, but by leveraging other partners. And I think we are doing relatively better on that score.
I was interested in the New Zealand experiment. It's a slightly different one we're doing in the UK, but in May we're launching a treasury fund, which again is a sort of cooperative of councils pooling their short-term money resources, because every council does it individually, they'll get a very low rate of return. Putting all our resources together, we can get at least another 0.5%. Now, we have holdings sometimes of about £5 billion in cash. Just think 0.5% on £5 billion is something we can really spend on services. So I didn't know there was the New Zealand experiment. We're going to rapidly have a look at what they've done to see what we can learn from it. But again, this whole question of shared services, both back and front office, questions raised, I think, by one of your colleagues, Kalile, about sovereignty and councils being very reluctant to give it up, aren't they?
Yeah, well, when it comes to South Africa, I would say we're relatively fortunate in the sense that we have a guaranteed sovereignty in terms of the constitution. local government raises more than 90% of its own funds. The rest is more patched up in terms of national transfers, but we're able to raise our own revenue. The difficulty, though, is that under the global economic crisis, it has been a bit difficult to be able to raise rates, payment for services, and so on. But so far, we are able to live within our own means, depending on the issues of affordability and economic strength of each of the areas in which our municipalities spatially are located.
Well, that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because we have here 3 local government systems where the local governments are able to raise their own money to a much greater extent than occurs in the UK, where local government's much more reliant on the central government. What effect does that actually have in times like this?
Well, it means we have to do, as usual, what we're told by central government to a very large degree. Now, if we ignore the financial problem, at the moment, of course, there are 3 bills going through the UK Parliament which will localise a lot more power and a local government finance review to change things. So I'm very hopeful that there have been some ministers here from the UK government. They too will have listened from this really rich experience, because actually, although we started local government off in the way that's recognised in the Commonwealth, because we started it, it's sort of got ossified, and we need to learn to change, to move with the times and do what our Commonwealth cousins are doing now.
Is there a flip side to the idea of raising most of your own revenue?
Well, there is. I mean, we're like South Africa in that we also are 90% self-sufficient in terms of funding. And interesting, most of the pain at the moment in New Zealand is being borne by the central government public sector, where they are leading significant cost cutting. Because local government in New Zealand has had 10 years of fully audited 10-year plans, it's got a degree of resilience and certainty around its funding. But I mean, the reality is these 10-year plans predict ever-increasing rates. So the driver for shared services in local government has been an economic one. It just makes sense to do things more collectively, lower prices. But it's not only a price argument, it's also a quality of service, consistency of service. Specialisation in service is important and significant in the benefits that are produced.
I mean, is there a political issue here as well, though, that as local governments change, the priorities of those governments change, if they enter into these partnerships or collaborations, that they can't actually change the direction of travel?
Well, but in British Columbia, as an example, we've been doing shared services since 1928. It's in our best interest to work together. For example, water, sewer, garbage are 3 classic ones that we've been doing since 1928, where it only makes sense to have one watershed where you keep people out of it, animals out of it. It's completely pure and pristine. The water comes down. We have basically set up a corporation that runs it, that we are all part and shareholders of. We work together. We all get to benefit from it. So it just makes sense for us to do those sorts of things. But as we go back to the Finance Authority, that's one where, again, we've been doing that for 25 years, and we have a AAA credit rating, so we're almost as good a credit rating as the Government of Canada. But it's a two-way street. We have to deliver these services. We have to take care of our people. So sure, you can say, well, we're self-sufficient, but we're self-sufficient in the fact that we just have to do these things. When it comes to the tax dollars, out of a tax dollar, we get 8 cents. So we have very little funding compared to what the challenges are, and so we are extremely efficient, and this is how we get efficiency.
And the sad thing from that experience for the UK, of course, local government used to collect the water. We used to do it efficiently, and we used to do it cost effectively, because we too, local government, can borrow cheaper than the private sector to fund long-term development. But of course, for ideological reasons, it was privatised. So what we're trying to do now, because local government here will have a power of general competence to do almost anything we want to, is to actually look not at water, because that's too late, but what other services that we can provide that are currently perhaps provided by the private sector or not provided at all, at which we can make a profit. Or we can choose not to make a profit but to keep the cost lower for our constituents. But that will be our choice. So we're moving into new areas, and the power of general competence will enable us to do that. And again, throughout the world, trading by local government is fairly common. In this country, it's fairly unusual. So we've got a lot of catching up to do.
Another issue that's been brought up is the issue of transparency and of accountability and scrutiny. And you talked, Marvin, actually a little bit about that. Can you tell us some more there?
Well, what we've done is we've set up a report that basically looks at the quality of life. And we're looking at all sorts of different factors in that, employment, recreational services, the transit system, all these sorts of things. And we're using statistics that are provided from by other sources other than us, so no one can say that we're prejudiced in what we're doing. We're taking their statistics, we're mapping them out so that we can see the trends of what's happening in our communities. Because we have the challenges of finances, we have the challenges of where do we spend money, where do we choose not to spend money, but it all has effects on our community. It all has effects on our citizens and how they live and how they work. So we're trying to track that right from the immigration statistics, from low income, all those sorts of things to track what are the effects, what is happening in our communities, so that then we can be a part of making sure that those are addressed, whether it's lobbying other levels of government for them to spend more money in there, or for us to get more efficient or redirect how we're spending our monies.
Now, I don't think many people would argue that that level of scrutiny is a bad thing, but at a time when money is tight, jobs are going perhaps, how realistic is it implementing that kind of transparency?
Well, it's interesting in our own country, generally compared to other Commonwealth countries. I'm sure you have public auditing systems in terms of Auditor General and so on, but also in our own case, we had levels of, systems of accountability in national government, the separation of powers, where you would have public accounts committees looking at public expenditure at national level, provincial level, but in local government we didn't have that. But we have started a process of introducing some of these vehicles where there is internal scrutiny around how we spend funds, for what purposes, value for money, and whether it has been expended in terms of the right priorities that were set. So we are now looking at measures to introduce municipal public accounts committees. In addition to what Auditor General does, they also have access to us. But I think the general measure of accountability, we also do it in the interface with citizens. Regularly, we are looking at ways in which we can deepen the democratic accountability system back to citizens, not only to call them for rallies, but you actually go there and consult them. This is what we are setting as our priorities. And then thereafter, every year, you are able through a ward committee system to account back to citizens, to really increase the accountability mechanism back. So some of our municipalities are already having municipal public accounts committee, but we're thinking of introducing it right across the whole country.
It's interesting you talk about transparency and outcomes and measures. We have a particular transparency around decision making, and that is the way that communities actually support. For instance, the decision to have shared services must be consulted with the community. And there is, in fact, a thing called the special consultative process.
Do they care about something like that, though? Because in this country, people aren't interested in the structure. They just want to see what comes out of the sausage machine in terms of service.
Well, it would be true to say that the consultation requirements have a possibly idealistic level of expectation about the level of community involvement. But the point is that the Office of the Auditor General in New Zealand passes judgment on the quality of the consultation on a case-by-case basis. So he can rule that the community has not been sufficiently consulted, and that can overturn a council decision, for instance, to create a new entity specialising, for instance, in pizza home delivery.
That's very interesting. I'm sure
very democratic.
It's very democratic, because with us so far, I think we are a new democracy, but we are taking one thing at a step, one step at a time. This issue for me is very interesting, of even AG passing a judgment on the quality of your consultation, because so far in our own country at the moment, AG passes judgment on the state of finances, how you have spent. Now they've upped the gear now. They are also looking at performance. But we have not yet gone to the level of whether when you were consulting you did the right thing. We also have what we call a public protector. When citizens are not satisfied about whatever level of service or expectations have not been met, especially on constitutional guaranteed rights, access to water, electricity, whatever. We've begun to see cases where people take municipalities to the public protector. If there's no response on this, or you have not prioritize our service offering. So it's beginning to throw a lot of curve to municipalities. We might have all the structures, Richard. Chapter 4 in our Systems Act, for instance, as a country says public participation must be like this and this and this. That's structures. The effect of doing that is not really put to the test yet. But what we are appreciating at the moment is the emergence of coherence in our system of planning. For instance, the new administration of government at national level has begun to introduce what is called outcome-based planning, where we are all focusing on one set of priorities, one set of outcomes and the impact, and that will be binding across all tiers of government. In our own cases, spheres, national, provincial, local, and then they will also be pulling together decision makers, the mayor and the premier in a province. In other countries, we'll call it governor. They all sign one service delivery agreement. This is what we'll do on what? All of us. This is what we'll do on housing and settlements, all of us. And then you'll be accounting against that to the president or to the premier. So we're thinking this emergence of measures of accountability and coherence would take us a bit far in terms of ensuring that there is confidence in the system of planning.
I mean, that's really good example for United Kingdom to consider. Within the last comprehensive spending review, there was the idea of community budgeting. In that context, looking at a range of activities dealing with complex families. But this is very much what the Local Government Association has been asking for. Coherent budgeting, one set of outcomes, one set of outputs to deliver them, blind to the organisations, and if some of the organisations, including parts of the local government, have to go to deliver it effectively, so what? It's the taxpayer who needs the outputs and the outcomes that's important. And so there's important international learning, which we should be bringing back to the United Kingdom and saying to ministers, where this has gone very slow for us, let's get on with it. It's working in South Africa. They're 2 or 3 years ahead of us, whatever. Let's go and look. Let's bring those lessons back here.
Well, a big part of that, of course, is local government's relationship with central government in each of your individual countries, and I noticed that varies quite widely between each of the countries. And of course, we have a relatively new coalition over here. And I think you were saying that in New Zealand, you hesitated to use the word apolitical, but perhaps local government isn't quite as political as it is over here?
There is very little political affiliation of individual elected members. So if you like, first, the other point of difference, of course, is that mayors are directly elected, and essentially everybody who stands for election stands free of political affiliation. There are in the large cities some, if you like, left-right tickets, which loosely coincide with the Labour national trend. But as a general rule, there is no political nomination or designation of elected members. What that means is, in fact, that the relationship with central government is a lot more remote, because there is none of the dependence with the parties on the delivery of political outcomes.
I think one of the things is you got to look at what are our issues, because in Canada, our municipal governments, we're dealing with water, sewer, garbage, roads, buildings, those sorts of things. Those aren't left-right political things. So that on my council, we have the complete spectrum, from the left to the right and the center and every version of it. Now, mind you, our councils are considerably smaller than yours here in the UK. For 450,000 people, there are 9 of us. A mayor, 8 councillors. I can't believe how large your groups are.
90. Yeah. Exactly the same population in Liverpool.
To me, it just blows my mind. But what we do is, because the issues are not left-right political philosophy issues, we're able to work together. We focus on what is the issue, what is the problem, and we come from our different perspectives of life to look at the problem, find solutions, and actually we work together extremely well in our council, and we have very little arguing and fighting, and I don't know what you would do with 90 people in one room.
Well, sometimes we have squabbles which are unnecessary, but in fact, if you look at all the councils in the UK, 95% of the business goes through unopposed, no matter how political the council is, because we're being pragmatic about pragmatic issues. The interface, the difficulty comes between local government and central government. And sometimes I think that I'm a leading member of the national party of local government, taking on whoever happens to be in Westminster at the time, the national party of central government. So there are fissures between the two layers, which are much more important than the political differences inside the layers.
Now, I mean, moving on a little bit from local government as we approach the end of our time, obviously we have a bit of a UK audience watching this, and a coalition government exists now, of course, in the UK, and there's a different history of coalition governments and minority governments in your countries. Just interested to get your take. There's a sense here that perhaps minority governments can't work. There's something of a history of minority governments in Canada, and it seems to work.
It's working very well. As a matter of fact, the current government, which is a minority government, is amazing the media, because the media keeps expecting it to fall any time now, and it hasn't, because it's been able to take very pragmatic positions and find enough people willing to vote for it to get it through at all times. So I think sometimes minority governments tend to be a little more sensitive to the community and a little more sensitive to what the political mood is, and therefore adapt their policies to that.
And Richard's party, the Liberal Democrats, are part of the coalition here, and there's, I think it's fair to say, some discontent within the party about their role within that government. Coalition government's completely normal in New Zealand. How do those perhaps smaller parties, often the third parties, kind of reconcile themselves to not always having every piece of legislation fit their party? Well,
I think you're right again, and New Zealand's had minority governments for the last 3 elections, ever since basically the introduction of MMP. This, in fact, means that the minority parties exercise disproportionate leverage. And interestingly, the Minister for Local Government is the leader of a minority party, the centre-right party called the ACT Party in New Zealand. And that minister has led a quite strongly party-led agenda in local body reform. So the effect for local government in New Zealand of minority government has been quite strong since the last election.
Okay, and we are coming very much to the end of our time. I just want to really quickly touch on one last subject, and that's the issue of stimulus packages. Olile, you mentioned that earlier, that South Africa still has local municipal stimulus packages, and actually we're coming out of the stimulus package here. What I'm interested in is really, how does a country cope with coming out of the stimulus package and dealing with a new reality when that money has gone?
Well, I think for us, given the different set of economic circumstances, at the time when it was a nice time, we were able to put aside quite some money, reduce the deficit quite significantly. We started entering a phase where we had to hit budget surpluses. But when the gathering storms were beginning to shape, we were able to absorb quite a lot of those storms, and when it actually hit, instead of cutting on expenditure, we actually boosted the expenditure, especially on infrastructure, areas that are able to have a stimulative impact in the general spatial landscape of the economy. And I think second, we're also helped by the hosting of the World Cup, and at that time we had to spend and spend and spend, and local government was a key player around that area.
But you're talking about stimulus on infrastructure, and that's quite different to what happened in the UK, isn't it?
Yeah, the trouble is we didn't expand the infrastructure spending quickly enough. We spent a lot of money on service delivery and things that were always going to be exceptional to keep the economy going for 2 or 3 years have now gone into people's psyche as the things that we do. And it's going to be very, very difficult to explain that actually we will be going back to a historically high level of public spending. 41% of GDP is high for most Western democracies, but we're going to not do some of the things we've only done for the last 2 or 3 years, which everyone thinks we now should do permanently. So retreating from a high level of service delivery is quite difficult to explain to people.
And just any last thoughts on dealing with coming out of that kind of investment?
Well, interestingly, New Zealand's external debt levels are not dissimilar to Portugal, Ireland, Greece and Spain. This is not actually widely picked up, but that has heavily conditioned the behaviour of the New Zealand government. It has been probably the most stimulus-free and the most fiscally austere of any of the Commonwealth governments. And of course, given the low level of local government on central government funding, this hasn't impacted significantly, but it has impacted significantly on the New Zealand public sector.
And in Canada, the stimulus package has been focused on infrastructure. So again, we'll be able to adjust to that. But it was one of those ones that we've never seen so much money from the federal government in our history. So that we've just delighted in it, because all of a sudden we've been able to get some things going that we've been waiting for years. So for us, it was very good. By the same token, now the regular construction industry is starting to come back, and I imagine we should have a fairly seamless transition.
Well, gentlemen, we have run out of time. It's been an absolute delight to speak to all of you. Thank you for your time, and I hope this has been fruitful for you as well.
Thank you.
Thanks.